Okay, I've started the recording and we'll get started in a moment. All right, the clock on the wall says 9 a.m., so let's get started. Welcome, everybody, to the 2021 Virtual Residency Workshop. I am super happy to have y'all here. This is kind of my favorite time of year, is doing these workshops. And I'm really glad that we can be together for this. I wish we could be together, some of us in person, but let's hope for next year. And I'm very excited that we put together such a great program. So let's dive right in. I'm going to keep my slides in non-presentation mode because that makes it easier for me to watch the chat. So if you have questions during my talk, you are encouraged to dive right in. Don't think of it as interrupting. Think of it as having a conversation. I love questions at any time during my talk, and I don't get derailed by having questions in the middle of my talk. So I'm happy to have you dive right in. You can do it in the chat. You can do it by voice, however you want to do it. You don't have to raise your hand. Just dive right in and go wild. So this is the overview of the workshop. So let's go right into it. We've got a workshop webpage that's got the whole agenda. It's got all the slides. It's got pointers to Google Docs for the sessions. And we will be uploading videos as we go. And then those videos will be posted on a YouTube page that I've already set up. And the wonderful thing about that is not only will it be available in high def, but it'll also be closed captioned. I am going to try, I'm going to see if this thing allows it. Give me a second. Okay, I'm going to try auto closed captioning. Nope, I guess not. All right, that's not an option. Okay, never mind. There's also a Gmail address that auto forwards to me. So you're welcome to use that as well, or you can just send an email to me personally. We're on Zoom. We're only on Zoom. You can do Zoom on your favorite desktop or laptop PC. You can do Zoom on your handheld phone or tablet. Or if that's not going to work for you, you can call in on the phone and just download the slides if we've been able to post them in advance. We can't guarantee that for every person who's doing slides, we will be able to post them in advance. So that's kind of the least ideal option, but there it is. And we are going to post the stream videos I mentioned, and it will auto caption, but that usually takes a couple of hours after it's uploaded. Please mute yourself if you aren't talking, and that includes muting your camera. Because not everybody has a really strong connection, and so having extra movement probably won't help. You have to have a Zoom account, which you can get for free if you don't have one otherwise. And please make sure either you put your name, first and last name, or your first name. So I would love to do the show mode, but then I can't watch the chat. So I would much rather be able to see your questions as they happen live than not. It's harder to do if I put that in slideshow mode. You got a URL for Zoom in your email. If you need to download the most recent version of the Zoom app, please download the most recent version. I believe there is a new version literally today. So you want to make sure to apply that.
No, 566 is the most recent one. Maybe for Windows, not for Mac, 566.
I saw in the release notes yesterday, they listed that there would be a June 7 release. So I don't know what to make of that.
Well, maybe that'll come later today then.
Right. If you're doing audio only on the telephone, you can do that very straightforwardly, but please do send me an email with your full name, first name, last name, and your institution and the phone number you called in from. So that I can track that, so I can properly report this back to the NSF. I'm not reporting your name, I'm just reporting numbers, but I want to get as accurate numbers as possible. If I don't know who maps to a particular phone number, I can't count that phone number. We do not have a toll-free option. There's no money for that. So if you're coming in from the outside, outside the US, there are phone numbers available there as well. Again, not toll-free. Keep your camera off, keep your mic off, except when you are talking. This is and a quick outline. This is an experiment. We'll walk through what CI facilitators are. We'll do a little background on the virtual residency and how it got funded, why we can't use enterprise IT approaches to training in order to train CI professionals, and then we'll work into the virtual residency itself and this year's workshop, and then talk about how great you are and how important you are. Won't that be fun? So lots of you this is new people with new stuff. This is the 7th cohort of the virtual residency. We started in 2015. We've done a workshop every single summer, just one every single summer. So you're helping us pioneer a new way of training the next generation of cyber infrastructure professionals. And it's up to you to make a success of this workshop. Now, we have a ton of speakers and panelists and moderators, and almost all of them are volunteers from within our community. Some of them are from outside our community helping us. But the way you make this a success is participating and especially asking questions. Remember, the only dumb question is the one you didn't ask. If you've got ideas, if you've had experiences that are relevant, please volunteer them. Please dive into the discussion. You all are in charge. We are not in charge. We're just running Zoom. Okay. Also, okay, we've been doing this now for, this is our 7th go round, but that just means that we don't know what we're doing. We've done 7 times, and each time has been very different, often with new session topics, sometimes always with new content and new speakers and new presenters, new panelists, new moderators. And for the intermediate and advanced topics, we definitely don't know what we're talking about. And the proof of that is we don't have talks for the most part at those levels, 1 or 2, but not many. Most of these sessions at the intermediate and advanced levels, most of the sessions at the introductory level are 1 or a few presenters, because we really do know a lot about those topics, and one person can really cover 75 minutes of content on that whole topic. But for intermediate advanced, we don't know what we're talking about, or we only know a little bit. And so what we want to do is we want to work with you, and each one of us will contribute the small amount we know, and collectively we'll learn a great deal from each other. Okay, let's talk about cyber infrastructure facilitators. So what is a facilitator? And those of you who've been through the introductory material before are familiar with some of this. So way back in 2012 or thereabouts, there was this first attempt to put together a proposal to the National Science Foundation on specifically researcher-facing cyber infrastructure professionals. And Miron Livni from the University of Wisconsin-Madison coined this term, Advanced Cyber Infrastructure Research and Education Facilitators, or ACI refs. These are folks, and now we've shortened it to cyber infrastructure facilitators or research computing facilitators or whatever. These are folks who work directly with researchers and educators to help them improve the work they're doing and their productivity, and grow their aspirations using advanced cyber infrastructure, and sometimes not very advanced cyber infrastructure. Typically, at most institutions, you have a small cohort, perhaps 1, perhaps less than an entire full-time person, perhaps someone doing it part-time, has responsibility for the entire institution or even multiple institutions. And they come from a very broad variety of backgrounds. You all come from a very broad variety of backgrounds. Someone has asked, are we going to use the same Zoom the whole week? Yes, it's going to be the same Zoom the whole week, unless something goes horribly, horribly wrong, which did happen one year, and we had to change Zoom midweek. But for the rest of our hope is, knock wood, our hope is that we will be using the same Zoom the whole week. Okay. So some of the folks on the call and in general among facilitators are faculty, current or former faculty, current or former postdocs, current or former researchers, research staff like research scientists, research programmers, current or former IT professionals, including enterprise IT. One of the most common ways that someone gets selected at an institution to be in charge of research computing at the institution is one day the CIO comes into a meeting and says, okay, Janet, from now on, you're in charge of research computing. And Janet goes, hamana, hamana, hamana. And, but she figures out how to do it and hopefully comes and joins us at the workshop. And then students, graduates and undergraduates, current and former, have been very important among CI facilitators. And this fits into a general model we have for how to think about cyber infrastructure professional roles. These are by no means the only roles, but they're really the most common roles. Researcher-facing roles, where you're working directly with researchers, like cyber infrastructure facilitators. System-facing roles, like cluster system administrators or research network engineers, people like that. Data-facing roles, like research data librarian. Software-facing roles, like research software engineer, and stakeholder-facing roles, like the director of the local HPC center. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, but it's the most common that we typically encounter. And this is not an exhaustive list of job titles by any means, and we'll have some discussion of that later in the week. But this is a really good model for thinking about these roles. And an individual may have multiple of these roles both at the same time. For example, here at OU, all of our system administrators not only have system-facing role, but also each and every one of them also does researcher-facing roles. Sometimes does data-facing roles. So all of these sort of fit together. What is a cyber infrastructure facilitator not? Well, or at least not necessarily. A CI facilitator is not necessarily a computer scientist. In fact, my experience has been that only a very small fraction of cyber infrastructure facilitators come from a CS background. I do, but I'm unusual in that way. Most CI facilitators come from a non-computer science, typically STEM background, but also non-computer science, non-STEM backgrounds. I wouldn't say are common, but certainly happen quite a bit. And they're not necessarily system-facing. This is a confusion that we get with people who are outside of the cyber infrastructure professional world, is the sense of, well, if it's a cyber infrastructure professional, then surely they must be a cluster sysadmin. And yes, thank you, Dina. English and theater tech major, right? So while I wouldn't claim that that's common, I would certainly say that that's normal. And not a system person. Again, there are system-facing people doing cyber infrastructure facilitation, but most CI facilitators, in my experience, are not also system-facing. Some are, most are not. Okay, so what do we do as CI facilitators? We work directly with both STEM and non-STEM. I'm gonna use the broader description: research, scholarly activity, and creative activity. So research, scholarship, and creative activity. So this includes humanities, this includes arts, business, sports, you name it. But to advance the computing intensive and or data intensive aspects of the research or scholarship or creative activity that they're engaged in. So what would be some examples of that? And this is by no means an exhaustive list, but we went to the trouble of pulling this list together for a proposal that we submitted to the NSF back in January. So I thought, let's leverage this and kind of work our way through it. So here are ways that CI facilitators improve productivity for researchers and educators. We help adapt researcher workflows to cyber infrastructure systems like supercomputers, clouds, storage, and teach them how to use those and how to use them effectively. We bridge the gap between the researchers and the technology experts. So for example, you may have a research network engineer and a researcher, they may not have a lot of experience talking to each other, explaining things to each other. And so it's valuable for them to have an opportunity to have someone who can help them learn how to talk to each other and work together effectively. Anticipate new needs. So many of us, for example, are tasked with guessing what our users are going to need over the next 4 or 5 years, especially if we're going to buy a new cluster and we're doing what we in the trade sometimes refer to as a forklift upgrade, where we take out the old cluster, we stick in the new one, and people move to the new one and off they go. If you do a forklift upgrade and you're just buying a machine and you're not going to buy another machine for 3, 4, 5 years, then you better be pretty good at guessing what people are going to need over the next 3, 4, 5 years. So GPUs are a really good example of that, or more broadly, accelerators for things like machine learning and for various kinds of traditional number crunching as well. If you've got researchers who have limited coding experience, then helping them to design software or scripts, or to port software or scripts to particular architectures or particular use cases. Teaching cybersecurity and compliance. A big thing that many of us are working on now are legally regulated computing and data, like HIPAA, like controlled unclassified information, ITAR and EAR, things of this nature. And so we really have to be able to help our researchers understand both what the issues are and what to do about those issues. Develop strategies for specific use cases. Teach data management. So research data librarians, for example, are very active in doing this, but research facilitators do this as well. Hook people up to both local and national, maybe regional training opportunities. Like if you've got software carpentry workshops, if you are hooking people into Exceed workshops, things of this nature, helping people find the training that they need. Helping the researchers evaluate technology solutions. Am I better off with fewer cores and lots of RAM, or lots of cores and a slower clock speed, or whatever it might be? Am I better off on some kind of accelerator like a GPU? Those sorts of questions. Recruiting new users. We're always looking to have new users because they're our bread and butter. One of the things that I've seen over and over again is that every research discipline has cycles. They have cycles where they are very prominent and there's a lot of money, at least relatively speaking, compared to the usual. There's a lot of money available for them in the upside of the cycle. And then they plummet into a trough where they are less visible, they are getting less attention, they're getting less funding. The PowerPoint slides are posted on the webpage, www.oscar.ou.edu/virtual-residency-2021. That's also in the emails that I've been sending. That cycle, if you are not constantly recruiting new users and new disciplines, or users from a broad variety of disciplines, then you're going to find when you get into a fallow period for what had been your hero disciplines, you're going to find yourself much less popular, useful, needed, and perceived as needed, because you weren't able to catch the upswing of the other disciplines. You want to make sure that you're always catching the upswing, because some of your folks are always on a downswing. Researcher advocate to central administration. You're the person who has to go to the administration and say, this is what someone needs, okay? And then working with the researchers for the CI parts of publications, posters, and of course for grant proposals. So some of us, for example, have boilerplate text that we can send anybody who's writing a proposal and say, use this in your facilities description, use this in your project description. Here's some broader impact line items you can use, things of that nature. Okay, so what qualities do CI facilitators have? Well, way back 5 years ago, I was working with a colleague, James Cuff, who was then at Harvard. He since has retired from the cyber infrastructure business, but we sort of drew a little stick figure diagram on a whiteboard And I think he or someone turned it into a lovely kind of icon here. So we've got two different axes here. One is focusing on technology, the way that, for example, an IT professional would, and the other is focusing on research, the way a researcher would. The other axis is, do I enjoy people or do I enjoy things, right? People who enjoy people and who like research are more likely to become faculty. People who enjoy people and love technology are likely to become, for example, a help desk person, right? We work with people about technology. People who like technology and focus on things become systems folks. People who like technology and focus on research become the researchers. But smack dab in the middle of that, people who love both the technology and the research, people who love both the things and the people, they are happy right in the middle. That's the sweet spot for cyber infrastructure facilitators. Okay, so who cares? Why does this even matter? Well, researchers care because we are incredibly helpful to them. And those of you who've gotten love letters from your researchers, from your faculty, from your students, that you help them do a thing, and they're grateful for it. The best thing to do when you get those love letters, and in fact, it's worth asking people to forward them, the best thing to do with those love letters is to send them along to your boss so that your boss knows that the work you're doing is valued. Forward those love letters along to your boss. Forward them to other institutional officers. National leadership cares about it. And here's some quotes that we tracked down in some national reports. So there was a group called the National Cyber Infrastructure Coordination Service Conference. It's an NSF-sponsored thing. They said, let's incentivize the development of efforts that bring together cyber infrastructure professionals to learn from one another and to generate community efforts to identify and improve leading practices. That is exactly what we're doing all this week. Okay. There was another report, Cyber Infrastructure 2030 from the NSF. They had a couple of really good pull quotes from that. NSF should develop mechanisms to support teaming of scientists and engineers. And here by engineers, they didn't mean engineering researchers. They meant systems engineers, cyber infrastructure folks with, here they do mean engineering researchers, with cyber infrastructure professionals to ensure that science and engineering research benefits from future advances in cyber infrastructure. Well, that's our bread and butter. That's what we do for a living. They also said the skill and knowledge needed to use cyber infrastructure is very advanced and beyond the reach of most domain scientists. Professionals with cyber infrastructure expertise are in very short supply, and there's an increasing need for bridge technologists, us, with enough domain expertise to understand research requirements and enough technical cyber infrastructure expertise to develop and apply the right cyber infrastructure solutions. Skills development, reliable funding sources, and rewarding career paths are desperately needed for us, right? So we're only addressing one of those in this particular week, but it's a really crucial one. So am I just whistling in the wind, or is this the real deal? It's the real deal. Now, I haven't updated this for 2020. I didn't go to the trouble, but we did this back at the beginning of 2020 based on data up through the end of 2019. And we found that there were about 1,250 people who were in any or all of the Campus Champions, the Virtual Residency, and or the CARC researcher facing group. And that had grown from 10 back in 2008 to 1,250, and this is already now a year and a half ago. And from 10 institutions to over 400 institutions, again, a year and a half ago. So those numbers inevitably are up. It's probably closer to 2,000 now, or certainly at least 1,500. It's probably closer to 500 institutions. Exponential growth in both the number of cyber infrastructure facilitators, which is by no means all cyber infrastructure professionals, by the way, just facilitators, and the number of participating institutions. Okay, a little background on the virtual residency program itself. Where did this come from? Way, way back in 2013, and actually the process got started in 2012. several of us were summoned to a meeting. I think it was at the DFW airport hotel of some kind or something along those lines. And there were 13 institutions that showed up to this meeting, led by Clemson and University of Wisconsin-Madison, to submit an 8-figure proposal. I think it was like 33.5 million or something, to pay for multiple cyber infrastructure facilitators at the 13 institutions for 4 years. There was some advanced networking in that as well. There were some other components I'll get to in a minute. But OU got a piece of the action that was very specific. One was to create this virtual residency program, teach people how to be a cyber infrastructure facilitator. And the other was to create a program specifically for EPSCoR jurisdictions, because there were only 3 of us out of the 13 that were from EPSCoR jurisdictions. And the NSF came back and said, tell you what, we'll give you 1/7 as much money, 1/6, 1/7, 1/6 and a half, to do half as many institutions for half as many years, covering half as much stuff. So they created what they called phase 1. Phase 2 never actually got funded, but we were one of the phase 2 institutions. And so the NSF then had this new campus cyber infrastructure program. And they started that in 2012. And initially it was either get money for machines, mostly networking gear, or do some research about advanced networking. And then in 2014, they added more sub-programs. And one of the sub-programs was get a campus cyber infrastructure engineer, a research networking engineer for 2 years, paid for by the NSF. Well, historically, the NSF has not typically offered to fund non-researcher personnel. So when they offered to do that, everybody and their dog was going to submit one of those proposals. And we needed something that would be a differentiator. So I thought back to some attempted failed grant proposals that I'd done in this area. Way back in the early 2000s, I had 3 failed attempts for a $3 million 5-year version of this. Failure, failure, failure. Then in the late 2000s, I had 3 failed attempts for the same thing, but $250,000 over 2 years. Failure, failure, failure. And I thought, well, I'll just recycle that. But since the total amount of money I can ask for is only $400K, and they're going to want to spend most of that on the thing that nominally the program is supposed to be about, I will just shave 10% of that and call that, we'll take 40 grand instead of 3 mil, 40 grand, and we'll say that's going to be the same thing that we were originally going to spend 3 mil on. And boy, the reviewers thought that was swell, right? They loved this virtual residency idea. And they gushed over it. They thought it was so wonderful. This is some of the best reviews I'd ever gotten. I love this one. No major weaknesses in the proposal. That it was so nice. That tasted good. They said specifically, they called out the virtual residency program and said it was an awesome idea. Later on, when we submitted the proposal that became the Campus Research Computing Consortium, or CARC, which is very active now, and has been for the last, I think, 5 years, we incorporated the continuation of the virtual residency into that proposal. And they were very excited about that, with one caveat. They said, as long as it's not just focused on those original 6 institutions in the ACI Ref Phase 1 grant. Well, just for the record, the worst we ever did, which was in 2016, was 91% of our participants were not among those 6 institutions. Only 9% were. The best we ever did was 2 years ago, when only 2% of our participants were from the original 6 institutions. So we really have focused on broad national and even international impact. Okay, now, why don't we just do things the way the enterprise folks do? The way the enterprise folks approach training is very traditional and very successful. Things become traditional because they work. So why the heck don't we just do things that are known to work? Well, it's a matter of scale. Enterprise IT, software engineers, enterprise systems folks, database folks, on and on and on, right? Traditional computing professionals. There are millions of them out there. Way back in 1970, it was 500,000, and they were about 0.5% of the US workforce. Even 7 years ago, which is the most recent data I could find on the US Census website, there were 4.5 million of them. So it went up by a factor of 10 over a 44-year period. And now they're about 3% of the US workforce. And that's a growth rate of 5.3% per year, which means that the number of traditional IT and computing professionals is doubling every 13 years. It's actually 13.1. So there's zillions of them. So of course there are degree programs at every level. There are professional certifications. There's an enormous amount of resources devoted to constantly updating the skills these folks have. And by the way, this doesn't even take into account the explosion of data science degree programs in the latter half of the 2010s. There are now data science degree programs. The last I looked, there was only one US state left that didn't have at least one data science degree program at an institution in its state. By now, that's probably not true anymore. Now it's probably every US state, but I haven't actually checked to verify that. Research computing isn't anywhere close to that. We are 4 orders of magnitude smaller than traditional IT and computing professionals. 4 orders of magnitude smaller. We are 1/1000th, 1/10th of 1% as big. So there aren't any degree programs, there aren't any certifications, there are minimal resources for updating skills. The best we can hope to do. Nobody's going to start a degree program for this because there are only thousands of us. And if there are only thousands of us, only tens of us live near enough to that institution to sign up for the degree program. And those tens of us are spread out over a 40-year career span. So there are only a handful of us who would actually sign up for such a degree program. It's not going to happen, or at least not anytime soon. So we've got to do it ourselves. We've got to do it for ourselves, by ourselves, as informal education. Okay, let's talk about the virtual residency program. So what is it? We teach pre-service and in-service CI facilitators how to do or how to improve their cyber infrastructure facilitation. That's our obvious visible agenda, but we also have a hidden secret agenda. So how do we do that? And I'll get to the hidden secret agenda in a bit. So how do we do this? Well, we do a summer workshop every year for a week. This is the beginning of this year's workshop. This is our 7th annual workshop. University of California system actually ran its own targeted workshop series, and the first 2 years were for cyber infrastructure facilitation. And then the last, maybe first 3 years, I can't recall. And then the last couple of years have focused on cybersecurity because that's where their needs have evolved to. Because that's like 10 or 11 institutions instead of hundreds of institutions. So we do planning calls. Many of you have participated in this. We just get together at the, when we're far away from the date, it's like once or twice a month. As we get closer, the pace picks up. And by the time we get down to the last few weeks, it's at least once a week, if not twice a week. I think last week we did it twice. Thank you, Sid. 3 years total for cyber infrastructure facilitators. And then the last 2 years have been cyber infrastructure or cybersecurity. We do an annual meeting at the SC conference. So we'll start planning that for this coming November because we'll be back in person. I think it's in St. Louis this year, isn't it? The SC21 conference. Starting in 2017, we decided we would start teaching people how to write grant proposals because that's a really key skill for building credibility with researchers, especially with faculty. My experience has been that faculty give you credibility the more what you do looks like what they do. So if they write grant proposals, then if you write grant proposals, you have more credibility with them. They understand the value of writing grant proposals. They give you a lot of credit for doing that. Same thing with papers. They write papers. If you write papers, even if you're only contributing a relatively modest part, that builds your credibility with them. The more you are like them, the more credibility they grant you. So we've been doing a grant proposal writing apprenticeship. And my idea was, the way I learned to write grant proposals was there was this faculty member in chemical engineering who was really good at writing grant proposals. And he invited me onto some of his because he needed someone with cyber infrastructure background. And we would just sit together and he'd walk me through the proposal that he was writing. And he would explain, he would think out loud, why are we doing things this way? Why are we presenting it this way? Why are we saying it this way? Why are we presenting it in this order? And I thought, well, why can't we just duplicate that in real life for everybody? So the grant proposal writing apprenticeship is we get together once every other week initially, and then once a week, we get together and write a grant proposal together. And it works beautifully. By the end of that process, you really understand what goes into writing a grant proposal. And if you're asked to contribute to a grant proposal at your own institution, you know how to do it. And then a few years ago, I think it must have been the 2018 virtual residency workshop, we were working through the thing and someone said, well, why can't we do that for paper writing? And I was like, well, of course we can do that for paper writing. So we just started doing a paper writing apprenticeship. It's the same thing. We sit down together for an hour every other week and eventually every week as we get close to the due date. And we write a paper together and it works beautifully. We've gotten 2 papers published. Well, 3, but the third one won't appear until next month. The conference is next month. And by the way, before the virtual residency, no one had ever been dumb enough to try and teach this stuff. Because you notice much of what we're talking about is not technical content. And the reason for that is there are plenty of other opportunities. The Carpentries teach technical content. Exceed teaches technical content. The National Computational Science Institute, and on and on and on. They teach technical content. You don't need us for that. You can go to other places and they'll do a better job of it than we would. We teach the profession of cyber infrastructure facilitation, and no one had ever been dumb enough to try and do that until we were dumb enough to try and do that. Well, why do we do this? Well, typically, cyber infrastructure facilitators have really strong experience within their own discipline, which more often than not, as mentioned, is not computer science, is not IT. Most facilitators and other cyber infrastructure professionals haven't ever been faculty. So figuring out how to work with faculty is non-trivial. Faculty are strange, and they're strange for a very interesting reason. They don't have a boss. That's very hard for most normal human beings to wrap their brain around. Now, by the way, I should tell you, I am both not faculty and faculty, and I have been for many years. So I understand both sides of the perspective. And I understand how strange faculty seem to non-faculty. But this is where we can help, and we have an entire session later today, early afternoon, 1:30 Central Time, an entire session from the perspective of a faculty member about what it is like to be faculty and what the implications are, and so on and so forth. We'll touch on that a little bit, but he's really going to give you the deep dive. Sometimes the cyber infrastructure facilitators have little or no research experience. This is especially true for IT professionals who get moved over to research computing. And that can take a lot of flipping your brain upside down. That's not trivial to do. Some people can do it really effectively. Some people need to work at it to get there. And some people, try as they might, are never able to flip their brains upside down. So it takes a significant amount of doing it. Even if they do have a strong research background, they may have no experience with research in other disciplines than their own. That makes it really hard. Prior to COVID, the virtual residency was in the ballpark of a physical conference with lots of virtual participants. So, and we will get back to the hybrid model next year, knock wood. Yes, that's absolutely correct. Oh, and a good comment, reflecting back to what we said a little earlier, if you bring in grants, then the administration sees you as a rainmaker. You are an investment, not a cost. If you are bringing in more money than you cost, you are adored. Heck, if you're bringing in half the money you cost, you are adored. If you are not bringing in money, you're a cost. And they will tolerate the fact that you're a cost, but you're a cost. If you're bringing in money, you're a rainmaker. Okay. And for those of you who'd like to have that Zoom lunch hour, I can reopen, but you have to give me time to process the video data first. Okay. All right. Sorry. When we started in 2015, nobody was teaching this stuff. And in the good old days, when I started in my role in 2001. I was appointed director of our supercomputer center, which had 2 people, including me. The other person was the systems facing person, and no machines when we started. We bought some machines pretty quickly, but nobody had an expectation of what I was supposed to do, what my job was. Heck, if I showed up, they were already delighted. Well, those days are over. Now, if you get hired into this role, you better hit the ground running. There is 0 time to learn the trade. Okay, so who is involved in the virtual residency? Well, since we started in 2015, we've served not quite 1,000, 965 people as of last week. Now, as of today, that number is probably up. By the end of this week, I expect that number to be over 1,000. And that's from 382 institutions in every US state and 3 US territories. And if the folks from the last EPSCoR jurisdiction get on this week, then we will have covered every US state and every US territory that is an EPSCoR jurisdiction. I'm not sure that means every US territory that has gotten grant money, but I'm sure that's not true. But the ones that the NSF, for example, has targeted, plus 12 other countries on, it's actually, I'm sorry, 6 continents, I believe, by now. That includes that 15%, 58 minority serving institutions, over 100 non-PhD granting institutions, over 100 institutions in EPSCoR jurisdictions, all but one of the EPSCoR jurisdictions, EPSCoR states and territories. 2/3 are campus champion institutions, and that's 3/4 of all of the campus champion institutions. So the virtual residency is the de facto campus champions training regime. And that's for all of the virtual residency activities, although almost all of these institutions have participated specifically in the workshops. There are a few exceptions, but not that many. Okay, I can't tell you who's going to be here this week. I can only tell you who pre-registered as of 8:58 this morning, Central Time. So we had 538 pre-registrants. That's down a little bit from last year. I actually thought we were way down from last year, but I was confusing 2 different events. So we're down a little bit from last year. We're down 44, about 8% from last year. And I would attribute that to 2 things. Number one, as many of you know, I had a major surgery in mid-February, and then I was kind of out of commission for a couple months. So that was 2 months of lost advertising time. And I think that cost us some registrations. And the other part is, quite frankly, a lot of people have Zoom fatigue. So I get it. It's hard to commit to a week-long workshop. Even if you're only going to come to a few sessions, it's hard to commit to that. I get it. So we're a little down from last year, but again, like 8%. And that's 254 institutions in almost every US state, 3 territories and 12 other countries on 6 continents. 11% of this year's institutions, of pre-registered institutions, are minority serving, 19% are non-PhD granting, and 24% are in EPSCoR jurisdictions. Okay, why is it hard to help researchers? There are really 4 reasons, and 2 of them are kind of closely interlinked. One is it's all over the place. So more researchers are doing computing intensive and data intensive research than ever before. And that's growing and growing and growing. I hear from faculty who have never had to incorporate into a grant proposal anything computing related Oh, now they're saying we got to start incorporating this stuff. Hey, great. That's what we're here for, right? We love when that happens. And we love hearing that the funding agencies are requiring it. That's our bread and butter. That's food. That's food on our table and silver in our pockets. Applicability. So more and more disciplines are doing computing intensive and data intensive research. So I was in a meeting, this is a couple of years ago now, I was in a meeting where on the way out, I was walking out with one of the English faculty, and they were talking about how much need they had for textual analysis, so AI stuff. And it was wonderful to hear them talk about that. On the flip side, we've discovered our campus IT conference has gotten 100 more attendees and all virtual because, of course, then they can do it from their desk. It's wonderful when you don't have to get out of your chair to participate. That's absolutely true. The machines have gotten more complicated. So we have deeper storage hierarchies, right? In the olden days, you had registers, cache, RAM, and disk. Now we've got flash. We've got to worry about tape. We've got object versus file on the spinning disk side, or perhaps the flash side. In fact, we've got multiple speeds of flash. Now we've got our non-volatile RAM, which is slower than the traditional RAM, and on and on. We got more levels of cache than we used to, and so on and so on and so on, right? It's getting deeper and deeper, and managing all of that is increasingly nightmarish. Conceptual distance. So in the olden days, in the long ago, and really I mean like 15 years ago, a typical new user would come to us from a Windows laptop background. And that was a pretty fair distance from Linux, batch, command line, remote, shared. Now they're coming from a phone, right? And so that's even farther. And I'll talk about that in the next session in more detail, but that's an even farther distance. And we have to bridge that gap. What has not changed, even though all this has been true, what has not changed, their tolerance for how long it takes to become productive remains 1 hour. If we can't get them up and running in 1 hour, they lose interest very, very quickly. That hasn't changed. Now, more and more institutions are doing this. More institutions have on-premise cyber infrastructure. I had occasion a couple of months ago to go through and look at the institutions that didn't used to have on-premise cyber infrastructure. Well, they do now, some of them. So I had to increase the list of the ones that did. All but one of the R1 institutions in the US, what the Carnegie classification calls very high research activity, all but one of them have on-premise campus cyber infrastructure. And the one that doesn't, it's because a sister campus in the same system has it for all of the campuses in that system. So they use that campus's cyber infrastructure. They don't happen to have it themselves. In the R2s, the high research activity institutions, these are PhD granting institutions, both categories, 84 out of 135. But also, if you look at the US News rankings, 49 out of the top 50 have on-premise research computing resources. And by the way, 25 of the top 25, 95 of the top 100, 132 of the top 150, and 159 of the top 200. 80% of the top 200 have their own on-campus cyber infrastructure resources. And I've got the URLs to prove it, but quite a list. It turns out also that in these same categories of institutions, they mostly have virtual residents, people who have participated in or are currently participating in the virtual residency program. So if we include both people who participated in the past and people who are registered for this event, not all of whom have participated yet, then it's all but one of the top 10. And I'm not going to name names, but I have poked them by email. 22 of the top 25, 47 of the top 50, 66 of the top 75, 85 of the top 100, and on and on and on. Even at the top 250, 62% of the top 250. And by the way, the percentages are a little weird because when there are ties, that can spill past that number, right? It's not 250, it's like 257 or something. So it's 160 out of 257. That's where the numbers come from. But a huge fraction of research intensive institutions, and by the way, the US News rankings, they do not go by R1, R2, right? They have different criteria than that. So their top 250 includes non-PhD granting institutions. But then if we look at R1s and R2s, 95% of the R1s have participated or are set up to participate in the virtual residency, and 80 of 135, 59% of the R2s. And remember, if you look at on-campus, 84 of 135 have on-campus cyber infrastructure resources. 80 of 135 have participated in or are signed up to participate in the virtual residency. For the first time last year, we did an evaluation of the workshop. And that's the PERC 21 paper that's being published next month. And that team was led by the same team that does the external evaluation for the EXCEED program, the NSF-funded umbrella over the NSF-funded National Supercomputing Centers. So we'll be presenting a paper about that. So I'm not going to give you the full story about that. You'll have to come to PERC, which I hope many of you are going to do, but I can give you a little bit of a teaser about that. The first thing we found was the percentage of women and underrepresented minorities in the virtual residency is much higher than in the cyber infrastructure professional field as a whole. And I will confess, I don't know why, but it is. So much lower than the percentage in the US, right? So US population is 51% women, virtual residency program is 30% women. Obviously, that's not anywhere close to proportional. But among IT occupations, it's significantly higher. And compared to the supercomputing world, we compared it to the SC conferences, which have published their percentages of women. It's on the SC websites, and it's double. Basically, we've got more than double what is typical for our area of computing. Same kind of thing is true for underrepresented minority. Double what is typical for our profession. Okay, does it work? Well, yeah, and this is your preview of coming attractions. It does. And now that we've done the evaluation, you know, in my heart, I always knew that it worked, but now we can prove it. So on a 1 to 5 scale, where 1 was bleh, and 5 was yay, we found that every single session rated between a 3.9, call that a B minus, and a 4.4, which is B plus A minus, right? So that's really good. And the only places where there were statistically significant differences among demographic groups, underrepresented minorities actually found a few things a little better than non-minorities did, and nothing worse. And women found 1 session worse last year than men, statistically significantly, and just the 1, and only 10%. So not too bad. And if you want to find out which one, you have to come to my talk at PERC, which is all online, by the way. So it'll be easy to do. You don't have to get in your car or on a plane. Here's another proof. It's an indirect measure, but I think a really, really important one. And this is true as of yesterday. I used the numbers from yesterday. So there have been 382 institutions, as I mentioned, that have participated in the virtual residency. Of those, 299 institutions have participated in multiple virtual residency activities. For example, they went to the 2019 workshop and the 2020 workshop. That would just be an example. And 67%, 2/3, more than 3/4 multiple activities, more than 2/3 multiple kinds of activities, where kinds are workshops, workshop planning calls, grant proposal writing apprenticeship, and paper writing apprenticeship. So we assume that you are very busy, you have plenty of important things to do, and you will not waste your time on useless stuff, that you would only do things that are worth the trouble. So if you keep coming back, it must be the case that it's worth the trouble. Now, here is the ecosystem for the cyber infrastructure world. We want you to join as many of these as are a good fit for you. If you want contact information, poke me, poke any of us. We're happy to provide contact information and get you involved with the national community. There's so much good stuff going on. And in particular, having a peer group to ask questions, to listen in on conversations is super, super valuable. You learn so much from your peers. It's unbelievable. Okay, let's talk about this year's workshop. We'll do a quick run through on the agenda. Right now, we're just doing this talk here, the overview talk. Then we're going to come back and you get one more of me until the end of the week, right? Most of this week is not Henry. You get 2 Henrys at the top of the week, and then you're done with me until the very last session on Friday afternoon. I mean, I'll pop in as host. I'm emceeing, but I'm not going to be presenting the rest of the week. Okay, so I've got a talk after this one, after the break from this one, on effective communication. And then my colleague Bruce Mason here at OU, he's a physics faculty member. He has a wonderful talk on what it's like to be faculty and how faculty are and all the good stuff that you need to know in order to work effectively with faculty. And by the way, today and part of tomorrow are primarily introductory. And then we'll move into the intermediate and advanced material for most of the rest of the week. And then Doug Genowine at the end of today, in the late afternoon, is going to talk about the cyber infrastructure milieu, particularly the machines and where to find them and the technologies and so on. Then tomorrow, we've got a panel led by Mohammed Tash of University of Nebraska-Lincoln on cyber infrastructure user support. And then Dirk Colbury from Michigan State is going to walk us through how to do an intake interview. And then we're actually going to do an intake interview exercise with real live researchers and a couple of simulated researchers. Then in the afternoon, we're going to start moving away from the introductory material. So we've got assessing and anticipating researcher needs, how to know what they're going to need before they need it, or how to figure out what they need based on what they're talking about. And then broadening the constituency via outreach and communication. And by the way, here are the definitions. Introductory is material for people who are new to the trade. And we have a set of sort of a minimal set of things that we think everybody should get introduced to in order to be able to follow along the rest of the content. Intermediate is more depth on how to do certain kinds of cyber infrastructure facilitation or facilitation for specific kinds of needs. And advanced is how to be an institutional cyber infrastructure leader. Okay, Wednesday, one more introductory session. It's the last introductory session of the week, which is components of a research computing resource. We used to call this the design of a high performance computing system, but we've sort of adjusted it a bit. And then we'll go into facilitating cloud computing, deciding which technologies to adopt and when. And then we've got some lightning talks on research data management. Thursday, we're going to learn about facilitating AI. And then we'll talk about ethics and privacy. We will talk about how to get things cheap or make more value out of the things you've already got. And then we're going to talk about careers in research computing and cyber infrastructure. Any HBCU, MSI? Yeah, there are some minority serving institutions. Well, I predict there are minority serving institutions participating today, but I haven't had a chance to look at the list. I won't be able to get to that data until this evening. And then we've got a panel on Friday on leading teams of cyber infrastructure professionals, then strategic thinking and visioning, the funding landscape, which includes a couple of folks from research funding agencies and some folks who have gotten research funding from such agencies. And then we'll wrap up. This will be when you get to see me again running a session. I'll be leading a roundtable, stories from the trenches. We do this every year. It's always very popular, which is tales of our experiences in the research computing world. You can easily get the agenda yourself just by going to the workshop webpage. And somebody asked if we would please put in a table of contents on a day-by-day basis, so I did add that. I'm trying to be a a good egg on that kind of stuff. We've got a ton of presenters. This is not the record, by the way. The last year was the record. I think we had 95 presenters from like 70 institutions or something like that. This year we have, and the reason it's fewer this year is because most of the introductory sessions are talks with a single presenter, whereas last year almost everything was either a panel or a set of lightning talks with multiple presenters. So it's of course going to be fewer this year. We're not breaking the record this year, but it's still a pretty strong group. So 78 presenters from 59 institutions. It's a lot of folks contributing to the workshop. And let me be honest about this. One of the things that drove the need for recruiting so many folks is a couple of years ago, we had a lot of people repeat in multiple sessions. And we got a number of complaints about that they wanted as many different voices and perspectives as possible. So we've worked very hard to address that. Okay, how did we pick our topics? Well, we started with, for the introductory level, there's a set of about 6 topics that we think of as crucial, that everybody should get exposed to. So those were the ones, since we're splitting the whole week into 3 pieces, roughly equal pieces, we wanted to make sure that we were able to touch on those areas for the introductory level. Then for intermediate and advanced, we took the past session titles, we stuck them into a survey, and we asked people to participate in the survey to give us prioritization, low priority, medium priority, high priority, and that's where we started for driving what topics to cover. We do have 1 new topic this year, but not very many. We have 20 time slots. The first one is always the overview. The last one is always stories from the trenches. So that's 18 that we had to fill out, and we just divided them up. And so 5 for each topic area. It's not perfectly that, but that's close. How do we pick the panelists? We did a little something different from what we did last year, but it was pretty much the same idea. We decided the sessions, and then we begged and pleaded and wheedled and needled until people caved and said, yes, I will be a panelist, or yes, I will be a moderator. And we tried to get as few repeaters as we possibly could. I actually am doing the most repeating of anybody. And even I am trying to minimize my repeat. And then, pester emails, and you all are used to getting it. Yes, the wheedling worked very well. By the way, I'm only as annoying as I am about all the spam I send because it works. If y'all would answer the first time, I would not have to send you the second and 15th email. Why do we mostly do panels? For intermediate and advanced, like I said before, the problem is that none of us have enough expertise to cover 75 minutes of content on that topic area. So if we have a panel or we have a set of lightning talks, then everybody can do on average 10 to 15 minutes. And we each have that much to contribute. So that's not a challenge. Almost all, this was true last year, this is true this year, almost all of the intermediate and advanced sessions chose to do panels. Very few chose to do lightning talks. What's our goal here? We want to learn how to work with researchers who are using cyber infrastructure, how to find them, how to help them. We want to learn how to be institutional cyber infrastructure leaders. That's the advanced component. We want to start thinking about becoming national cyber infrastructure leaders. And there's a really important reason that I'll get to in a minute. What we're not trying to do is we're not trying to teach you a lot of technical content. I mentioned this earlier. You can get that from other places. You don't need to get that from us. Our goal is to teach you the profession of cyber infrastructure facilitation and cyber infrastructure leadership. The hidden secret agenda is to recruit or set up for success the cyber infrastructure leaders of tomorrow. My idea is that the people in the future who will be best positioned to be cyber infrastructure leaders are the ones who have done the most work with actual researchers. The ones who know what researchers need based on years of experience working directly with researchers. In order to do that, we have to look to who is spending the most time working with researchers. By golly, it's us. So the hidden secret agenda is to get you ready to be first an institutional cyber infrastructure leader, and then a national cyber infrastructure leader, maybe a worldwide cyber infrastructure leader. Some of you already know how to do this, but it took you a long time to learn that on your own. We don't have that luxury anymore, as I mentioned earlier. We've got to get you to hit the ground running, right? If you get hired now as a cyber infrastructure facilitator, let alone a cyber infrastructure leader, you don't have what I had. I had 5 years to learn how to do my job. You have 5 minutes. So we need to help you get there. You're next. I want you to help us fill the world with cyber infrastructure leaders. Well, why should you do that? Well, I never do anything unless I have both good, warm-hearted, virtuous reasons to do it. That makes it possible so I can look myself in the mirror in the morning. And wicked, selfish, mercenary, base reasons to do it. That gets me out of bed so that I actually do the work. So the good, warm-hearted, virtuous reasons, you have good ideas based on your own experience, your own observation, and if those ideas could be implemented, it would help the researchers a whole lot. And you love helping researchers use computing. My whole career, I started helping STEM researchers use computing to improve their research when I was a sophomore in college. This was spring of 1985. So I've been doing this now. What does that make it? 35, 40, is it 35, 36 years now I've been doing this? And I still love it. It still makes me so happy to help a researcher improve their research using computing. And if you didn't love doing this, you would not have taken the job, right? So you must love doing it. And your administration also needs help understanding research computing, right? Many of them did not come from a research computing background. You can help them understand. You're not just teaching the researchers, you're teaching the administration. Remember, you don't just manage down, you also manage up. Help the administration understand the value, the impact, the importance of research computing. And then the wicked, selfish base reasons, right? You get paid better and you have better job security because they need you so bad. The fraction of employees at any organization, the fraction of people willing to be grown-ups is always low. If you're willing to be a grown-up, you win. Now, why should you be a national cyber infrastructure leader? Well, the national community would really benefit from your insights. You have learned a lot. You can share that. And you'll have a chance to influence the course of computing-intensive and data-intensive research. You'll have an opportunity to help things get better. And of course, the wicked, selfish reason, if you're noticed by other national leaders, that's going to help your career. So I mentioned about the ecosystem. I won't spend all day on this. We've already talked about some of these. Now, I know some of you are probably sitting there thinking, but I don't know anything about this. You're suffering from a standard problem that many of us, most of us, I would argue, suffer from. It's normal to have imposter syndrome. Every time I go to a conference and I sit in a talk, I think everybody in this room understands this stuff better than I do. Every single time I go to a conference, I have that. Every single time I think, oh, I've got to knuckle down and learn all this stuff because I'm so far behind. No. What makes you an expert is that you're 5 minutes ahead of them. If you know more than they do, you're contributing. You don't have to know everything to be useful. You just have to know more than that. How can you make your mark? Create a new thing that's good, or take a thing that's already good and make it better. So here's some things that I've done, that I've contributed to the community. Supercomputing in plain English was the very first. Taking research computing content, cyber infrastructure content, and making it easily digestible by STEM researchers who were not from computer science. The One Oklahoma Cyber Infrastructure Initiative. By the way, most of these I didn't do on my own, but I helped create. These were at least partially my brainchild, often our brainchild. But the One Oklahoma Cyber Infrastructure Initiative, a statewide initiative to share our cyber infrastructure resources and expertise for the betterment of everyone, has been fantastically successful and has been going continuously now for almost 13 years. The Petastore and now Our Store business model, a way of doing storage that is immensely cheap for everyone involved, even though it's expensive in the aggregate. And the virtual residency, including the grant proposal writing apprenticeship and the paper writing apprenticeship. And then a couple of years ago, the Cyber Infrastructure Leadership Academy for the folks who are aspiring to move from institutional cyber infrastructure leadership to national cyber infrastructure leadership. And then how to make good things better. Well, I contributed to the parallel computing workshops that the National Computational Science Institute had already been doing. The first time I went to one was as an attendee, and then I became an instructor and helped make them better. The SC conference education program, I went, then I contributed, then I led. And the Campus Champions. First I joined, then I contributed, then I became a co-leader. And so those of you who know Dana Brunson, who at the time was at Oklahoma State, now she's at Internet 2, I have to give her full credit. She's the real leader of that. But between us, we have made it even better than what we found it to be. The need is always growing. The Coalition for Academic Scientific Computation, which is sort of the professional society for academic HPC center directors, and to a lesser extent, government lab HPC center directors. When I joined, there were about 35 members. Now there are 93, but there's still a ton of growth room there. There's lots and lots more that can happen. And get ready to be in charge. Demographically, you are going to get dragged kicking and screaming upstairs. I guarantee it. And the reason for that is purely demographic. And because it's demographic, there is nothing you can do to prevent it. Every single day, and we're halfway through this process, a baby boomer, 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 every single day. We're halfway through that process now. By the end of this decade, by 2029, virtually all of the baby boomers will have turned age 65. Now, not all of them are going to retire at 65. In the olden days, that might have been true. That's not true anymore. And I probably won't retire when I turn 65. I love this stuff. I wouldn't want to give it up if I didn't have to. But more and more of them will retire. And unfortunately, more and more of them will die. And so the rest of us, I mean, especially the older you are, the longer you've been around. So you're the only ones left who have any idea how the joint is run. So we're all gonna get dragged kicking and screaming upstairs. We gotta be ready for it. Every single generation has to be preparing not just for their immediate role, but for their next role. And so those of us in Gen X, those of us who are millennials, we need to be getting ready. By the way, and I am at the very high end of Gen X. I missed the baby boom by 1 year. So we gotta be ready, because we're going to be dragged kicking and screaming upstairs, and they're going to need us to hit the ground running. On the other hand, here's the beauty of it. This is the best job ever. Now, it's not the best job ever for everyone. You remember that diagram, you know, people who don't live in the middle of that diagram, the two arrows, those people probably would not love this job, but we love this job. And the reason we love this job is every single day you get to see the value, the impact of the work that you do, helping other people be successful. You know, the terrifying part of it is when a student says to you, if I don't get this done in the next 2 weeks, I'm not going to graduate and I'm going to have to pay another year of tuition. And boy, you scramble to get them graduated, because you don't want them to have to put thousands and thousands of additional dollars into this. You want them to get out there and be productive and make your university proud and have them be proud of your university. But every single day we see the impact. Okay, here are some papers that we've been publishing. So you can read more about the virtual residency program. These are the grants that have covered the virtual residency program over the years. And thank you. And I don't have a lot of time for questions, but I'm happy to take questions. So Dina said, next role depends on how you define your role. I think there's always going to be a place for people whose job is to translate machines to humans so they can do their stuff more easily. I hope that's always going to be my role, whatever my title is. I agree. and to be perfectly honest, paperwork is not my favorite thing in the world, but it is a necessary evil. A lot of what I do for a living is a necessary evil so that other people can do the stuff that is the joyful stuff. If you hadn't already seen it, there's some CI professionalization materials on CARC, and later this week, a lot of advancement in all of the phases. Yeah, absolutely. Have I missed any questions in the chat? I saw there was a lot of stuff about the Slack. Okay, here's one. I missed one about okay. My institution is primarily a undergrad institution, University of Science and Arts of Oklahoma. I'm an associate professor of chemistry and the co-PI on the latest NSF Often grant. So this is a campus cyber infrastructure grant, in charge of research dissemination across the different institutions included in the grant. Yeah, Danny, I really appreciate you taking that role. And the wonderful thing we've been able to do in Oklahoma is we've been able to recruit more and more institutions into our, I don't want to say statewide cyber infrastructure, because that's not quite the right way of thinking about it. I want to say many institution campus cyber infrastructure. That's been, I think, very successful, but it's taken people like Danny pulling together to make it successful. So I think we've done a very good job of creating a model that other states can adopt on how to do cyber infrastructure collaboration within a state. And the One Oklahoma Friction-Free Network, or OFFIN, is a very good example of that. And more broadly, the One Oklahoma Cyber Infrastructure Initiative, which OFFIN is part of, I think is a really good driver of success at the individual institutions as well as statewide. Thank you for that comment, Danny. Have I missed any other questions? And I welcome you to ask questions. We're a little over our time here, but not badly, and there's a 30-minute break before we do our next session. All right, going once, going twice, sold. I'm gonna close out the session, but you know what? I'm not going to post. I'm gonna make a decision since y'all want to hang out. How many of you want to hang out? Just put it in the chat, or you can say it by voice during the lunch break today. Okay, so we have some. What I will do is I'll leave the session live during that period. So I'm not going to close out the session, nor will I close out this one, although I'm going to shut down the video and so on. But I'll leave the session live through the whole day, and then I'll do all the video stuff in the evening. The thing to be aware of is you will not have access to the videos until late tonight. But I will stop the recording. Yeah, I will stop the recording, but that won't change when the video gets processed. So I'm going to stop the recording now.